there is a moment in this story, a single extraordinary moment, that you need to hold in your mind as I tell you everything else. A wealthy man, a hot microphone, a bathroom in a New York hotel, and 5 words spoken to no one, apparently unaware he was still being recorded, killed them all, of course. That moment did not come at the beginning of this story. It came at the end. After 4 decades, 3 bodies, 2 trials, and one of the most bizarre lives ever lived, by a man who should, by every measure, have spent most of it in prison. This is the story of Robert Durst, of Susan Berman, of a woman named Kathy who disappeared in 1982 and whose body was never found, and of how a billionaire heir to a New York real estate dynasty managed to elude justice for nearly 40 years until a documentary filmmaker and a bathroom accidentally undid everything. Robert Allen Durst was born in 1943 into one of the wealthiest real estate families in New York City. The Durst organization owned and managed some of the most valuable commercial real estate in Manhattan, including eventually One World Trade Center. Robert was the eldest son, the heir apparent. He was also, by virtually every account, deeply troubled from childhood. His mother died when he was 7. He watched her fall from the roof of their Scarsdale home in what was ruled an accident. His father, by Robert's own account, passed the reins of the family empire not to Robert, but to his younger brother Douglas. The slight was something Robert never got over. He married his first wife, Kathleen McCormick. Everyone called her Kathy. In 1973, she was beautiful, vivacious, working toward her medical degree. By the late 1970s, their marriage had deteriorated badly. Friends described frequent arguments, physical altercations, a growing atmosphere of fear around a man with unlimited money, and, it appeared, unlimited contempt for the rules that governed ordinary people. On January 31st, 1982, Kathy Durst was visiting a close friend named Gilberte Najami at their country house in Westchester County, New York. Robert called repeatedly, insisting she come home. Kathy finally left. Before she walked out the door, she turned to Gilberte and said, "Promise me if something happens to me, you'll check it out. I'm afraid of what Bobby will do." Gilberte never heard from her again. Robert Durst later told police, and would repeat for decades, that he had driven Kathy to a train station that night, that she had taken the train back to New York City, that they had spoken on the phone later that evening, that she had simply vanished after that, and he had no idea what had happened to her. He did not report her missing for weeks. When he finally did, investigators looked at him immediately. The marriage had been troubled. He stood to inherit her assets. He had no credible alibi for the night she disappeared, but Kathy's body was never found. Without a body, without physical evidence of a crime, police could not charge Robert Durst. The case went cold, and Robert Durst, who had the best lawyer's money could buy, walked away. Enter Susan Berman. Susan was the daughter of a Las Vegas mob boss named Davy Berman, one of the architects of modern Las Vegas. She had grown up surrounded by money, power, and people who understood that sometimes things needed to be handled quietly. She became a journalist and author, writing about organized crime and Las Vegas history. And somewhere along the way, she became Robert Durst's closest friend, his confidant, his unofficial spokeswoman. She was one of the few people who knew what Robert was capable of. She knew because, according to prosecutors, she had helped him. In the days after Kathy's disappearance, someone called Kathy's medical school, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and reported that Kathy was ill and would not be coming in. The call was made in Kathy's name, but investigators later concluded that Kathy was almost certainly already dead by the time that call was made. The person who made that call, prosecutors argued at trial decades later, was Susan Berman, posing as Kathy, helping to establish a false timeline, helping Robert buy time and credibility. For 18 years, the arrangement held. Robert Durst was a suspect but not a defendant. Susan Berman was his friend and his protector, bound to him by what she knew and what she had done. Then in 2000, everything shifted. New York State investigators reopened the cold case of Kathy Durst's disappearance. Cold case detectives in Westchester County began taking a fresh look. They wanted to speak to witnesses. They wanted to speak to people who had been close to the couple. They wanted to speak to Susan Berman. Susan told Robert that investigators were coming, that the Los Angeles Police Department was planning to contact her. Robert Durst flew to Los Angeles. On December 23rd, 2000 or thereabouts, the exact date was never fully established, Susan Berman was shot once in the back of the head in her home at 1527 Benedict Canyon Drive in Beverly Hills. Execution style, close range. She would not have seen it coming. She would not have suffered long. The first indication that anything was wrong came from her neighbors on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2000. They noticed her dog wandering loose near the street. The back door of her house was standing open. Packages that had been delivered days earlier sat uncollected on the doorstep. When officers entered the house, they found Susan Berman on the floor of her bedroom, a pool of blood, a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. One responding officer looked at the scene and said, "That's like a mob-type thing." He wasn't wrong about the style. He was wrong about who had done it. The same day her body was found, the Beverly Hills Police Department received an unusual piece of mail, a handwritten letter, in block capital letters. It contained Susan Berman's street address, and one word, cadaver. Whoever sent that letter knew Susan was dead. Whoever sent that letter had been at that house. Investigators looked immediately at Robert Durst. He acknowledged he'd visited Susan recently. He said he had discovered her body himself, had tried to call 911 from her phone, but found it dead, had driven to a pay phone and called, but hung up without giving his name, and had then written the letter to lead police to her. He could not explain, he said, why he had written the letter rather than simply speaking to police. It was a story that made almost no sense, but it was also a story that was very difficult to disprove. Investigators analyzed the handwriting on the cadaver letter. An LAPD document examiner concluded in early 2001 that the letter had most likely been written by Susan Berman's manager, a man named Niall Brenner, not by Durst. That analysis, investigators would later discover, had been accepted without independent verification by the examiner's supervisor. It was a catastrophic mistake. The wrong conclusion, rubber-stamped without scrutiny, effectively closed down the most promising line of investigation, and Robert Durst walked away again. But he did not go quietly. In the months after Susan's murder, knowing investigators were circling, Robert Durst did something extraordinary. He disappeared. He moved to Galveston, Texas, a Gulf Coast city where no one knew his name. He rented a small room in a boarding house. He disguised himself as a mute, elderly woman, a wig, drab clothing, a practiced silence. He lived this way for months, a billionaire heir hiding in a flophouse, apparently convinced he could vanish into anonymity. His neighbor in the boarding house was a 71-year-old man named Morris Black. In September 2001, Morris Black was shot in the head inside Robert Durst's apartment. His body was then dismembered, cut apart with a saw and carving knives, and the pieces were loaded into garbage bags and thrown into Galveston Bay. A 13-year-old boy spotted a torso floating near the shoreline. Police found additional bags nearby containing arms and legs. Morris Black's head was never recovered. Robert Durst was arrested and charged with murder. At trial, he took the stand and told the jury what had happened. He said Morris Black had come to his apartment and discovered his real identity. He said Black had found his gun and threatened him. He said they struggled, the gun went off accidentally, and Black was killed. He admitted, freely on the stand, that he had then dismembered the body and thrown it in the bay. He said he panicked. He was acquitted of murder. The jury found that the state had not proved beyond reasonable doubt that the shooting was intentional rather than accidental. They convicted him only of evidence tampering for the dismemberment, a charge that carried no prison time. Robert Durst walked out of that Texas courtroom a free man. He had now been connected to 3 deaths and charged with none of them. For more than a decade, the case of Susan Berman remained officially unsolved. Robert Durst moved through the world, staying at luxury hotels, spending his inheritance, living the strange and solitary life of a man with too much money and too many secrets. Then in 2010, a filmmaker named Andrew Jarecki released a dramatized account of the Robert Durst story, starring Ryan Gosling. Durst saw the film, and instead of maintaining his distance, he did something no one expected. He reached out to Jarecki. He agreed to be interviewed. Those interviews became an HBO documentary series called The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. 6 episodes. Durst talking, in his own words, about Kathy, about Susan Berman, about Morris Black, about his life. Candid, strange, often unsettling, a man who appeared to believe he could talk his way through anything. During the production, Susan Berman's stepson gave the filmmakers a letter that Robert had sent Susan in March 1999, more than a year before her death. A personal letter, handwritten. The envelope had her address on it. The address was misspelled, Beverly Hills, with an extra E. The filmmakers compared it to the cadaver letter, the anonymous note sent to police on the day her body was found. The cadaver letter also misspelled the address, Beverly Hills. The same unusual misspelling, the same handwriting characteristics. Handwriting experts who examined both letters for the documentary said they appeared to be written by the same person. The filmmakers took this evidence to law enforcement. LAPD reopened the investigation. A new handwriting analysis was conducted, this time properly by multiple independent experts. The conclusion was that Robert Durst had almost certainly written both letters. It was the evidence that had been there all along, obscured for years by a single faulty analysis in 2001. While investigators built their case, filming continued. In the final interview session, Jarecki confronted Durst directly, showed him both letters on camera, and asked him which one was his. Durst studied them. He could not say. I wrote this one, he said, holding up his own letter. But I did not write the cadaver one. Except he couldn't tell them apart. After the interview ended, Durst excused himself to use the bathroom. He was still wearing his microphone. He apparently did not realize it was still recording. In the bathroom, alone, he began muttering to himself. The microphone caught every word. There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. The filmmakers discovered the recording months later going through their audio archives. They turned it over to law enforcement immediately. The LAPD used it as the final piece of a case they had been quietly rebuilding since the documentary began. On March 14th, 2015, the night before the final episode of The Jinx was set to air on HBO, FBI agents arrested Robert Durst in a hotel room in New Orleans. He was registered under a false name. He had a latex mask in his belongings. He had been making what appeared to be preparations to leave the country. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Susan Berman. The trial that followed was one of the most extraordinary in recent American legal history, delayed for years, interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, conducted in front of a jury while the defendant sat in a wheelchair and catheter bag in declining health. Prosecutors laid out a case that spanned 4 decades. They argued that Robert Durst had killed Kathy in 1982, had recruited Susan Berman to help cover it up, and had then killed Susan in 2000 when the reopening of Kathy's cold case meant she was about to talk. They presented the cadaver letter, the handwriting evidence, the misspelled Beverly, the phone records from the day Susan died, testimony from people who had known both Susan and Robert, and the bathroom recording, played in full for the jury. Durst's attorneys argued he had not killed Susan, that someone else had sent the cadaver letter, that the bathroom recording was taken out of context, that Durst had a lifelong habit of talking to himself and often didn't know what he was saying. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty. First-degree murder. September 17th, 21. Robert Durst was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on October 14th, 2021. He was 78 years old. He died in custody on January 9th, 2022, just months after his sentencing. He was never tried for the murder of Kathy Durst, whose body has never been found, or for the murder of Morris Black. Those cases died with him. There are things in this story that resist any tidy summary. Robert Durst was not a hitman. He was not a gang leader or a career criminal. He was a man born into one of the wealthiest families in New York, who moved through the world with a sense of absolute impunity. The quiet, settled conviction that rules were for other people. That money could buy silence, that the right lawyers could turn any verdict, that if you simply kept moving, kept spending, kept talking in that flat, odd, unreadable way of his, the system would eventually grow tired and let you go. He was right. For a long time, he walked away from Kathy's disappearance. He walked away from Susan's murder initially. He walked away from Morris Black's killing. 40 years of walking away. What got him in the end was not a detective's breakthrough or a witness coming forward. It was a filmmaker, a documentary, a microphone left on in a bathroom, and 5 words spoken to no one in a moment he believed was private. Killed them all, of course. Susan Berman was 55 years old when she died on the floor of her Benedict Canyon home. She had spent her adult life writing about crime, about the mob world her father had built, about the violence that lived inside money and power. She understood better than most how the people at the top of the world operated. She just didn't understand in the end that she was one of the people they were willing to get rid of.